Back in 2008, Satoshi Nakamoto created something that would fundamentally change the nature of money as humans understand it. This creation was called Bitcoin. However, Satoshi did not account for what is probably Bitcoin's biggest flaw, its inherent slowness. The native Bitcoin network processes transactions at roughly 7 transactions per second. This is because native Bitcoin's max block size, or the total size for each batch of transactions, can only be 1 megabyte. This is problematic since Bitcoin is supposed to be a cryptocurrency. If we think about global transactions that are taking place as you're watching this video, Visa and Mastercard reign supreme when it comes to digital payments. Currency, after all, is primarily meant to be spent and used to pay for goods and services. These two giants can process anywhere from 25,000 to 50,000 transactions or more per second. Naturally, Bitcoin's speed of roughly 7 transactions per second leaves a lot to be desired. This is why Bitcoin has settled into the broader financial role as digital gold. Since physical gold is similarly stationary, cumbersome to transact, and primarily a liquidity sponge as well as a hedge against uncertainty and inflation due to its limited supply. A few early solutions came about to try and fix Bitcoin's scalability issue. SegWit, or segregated witness, came about as a solution back in late 2016 to help try to scale up the total theoretical block size to 4 megabytes. A disagreement throughout the Bitcoin community arose over this block size, since some wanted to keep Bitcoin's smaller block size in order to preserve its decentralization. Since fewer nodes are able to download a blockchain with tons of data at any given time, increasing block size would result in a less decentralized network. Others, however, argued that scalability and processing transactions fast is what's most important. This right here is a glimpse at the blockchain trilemma, which I'll get into in a separate video. Anyways, some of the developers in the community who wanted a larger block size to increase scalability decided to branch off the code in what's known as a hard fork, to create a new version of Bitcoin just with a greater block size called Bitcoin Cash, which at this point is 32 megabytes, or 32 times larger than native Bitcoin's max block size and roughly 8 times larger than SegWit's theoretical max block size. Roughly a year later, this guy, Craig Wright, who claims to be the creator of Bitcoin, decided to create a hard fork of Bitcoin Cash's code called Bitcoin SV, aka Bitcoin Satoshi Vision. So Bitcoin Cash forked from Bitcoin, and Bitcoin SV, aka Bitcoin Satoshi Vision, was forked from Bitcoin Cash. Bitcoin SV has no max block size at all. In fact, according to BitInfo charts, BSV's highest recorded block size came at the end of 2022, with a block larger than 1.25 gigabytes. Ultimately, Bitcoin has won out over both of these for greater market share since their respective inceptions. More about all this in a separate video on the block size wars. Then comes the topic of today's video, the Lightning Network. The Lightning Network was launched around the same time as the block size wars to solve Bitcoin's scalability problem, but without altering how Bitcoin works fundamentally, unlike Bitcoin Cash or BSV. The way it's able to do this is by existing as a Layer 2 or L2 solution on top of Bitcoin's native Layer 1 or L1 blockchain. I'll go a lot more in depth on layers in a separate video as well because that's pretty important. But for now, just picture Bitcoin's L1 as the base layer. This is where Bitcoin transactions are confirmed. Bitcoin's L2, the Lightning Network in this case, sits on top of Bitcoin's L1, and the Lightning Network is where Bitcoin transactions are scaled up. So how does scaling Bitcoin transactions work in the Lightning Network? Well, the Lightning Network takes additional transactions and processes them offline. It then sends all of these transactions that it's pre-processed to the Bitcoin Layer 1 or base layer to be confirmed. It does this by essentially creating a completely separate network of nodes. These nodes are known as Lightning nodes, and every participant in the Lightning Network has a node. These nodes are connected through payment channels, so this creates a decentralized off-chain network to pre-process transactions that will ultimately be confirmed on Bitcoin's Layer 1. Each channel contains the state of transactions between two nodes, and payments can route through neighbor nodes even if the sender and recipient don't know each other. So when you send a business $10 of Bitcoin to pay for something, you're likely using a Lightning-enabled wallet that has its own node, and the business is either running their own node, using a third-party Lightning wallet, or relying on a third-party node operator. The transactions are only confirmed on-chain, but are validated off-chain to make transactions speed up. This is done by both nodes in a transaction agreeing to the state of their shared payment channel. by both nodes signing off on any transaction within that payment channel. If one of those nodes decides to make a change or update transactions in the channel, that change or update has to be signed off by both nodes. So the Lightning Network is effectively secured by this multi-signature dynamic. If there's some dispute or the channel is closed, this multi-sig commitment would be broadcast to the Bitcoin network to ensure that what was agreed upon is enforced on-chain. For example, if a malicious actor in a channel decides to broadcast an old commitment transaction to sign off on the current state of a channel, then the other node or party in the channel can use a revocation key to claim the malicious actor's funds as penalty. This risk of losing all your funds in a channel if you misbehave is what maintains trust between two parties in a channel. Lightning Network has grown into a well-utilized payment system for those businesses looking to adopt Bitcoin for payments. Donald Trump went to a bar called PubKey in New York and paid for a round of burgers using Bitcoin last year in 2024. This transaction was likely facilitated via the Lightning Network. Not long ago, Steak 'n Shake, a national burger chain, also began accepting Bitcoin payments through Lightning. Now this is all well and good, and with all that being said, I want to go into some cons of the Lightning Network. First is that the Lightning Network is actually fairly centralized, because running your own nodes requires opening a payment channel with another node, which requires an on-chain transaction. Because this is the case, trying to be your own Lightning node operator is expensive for payments, since Bitcoin fees to open a channel can cost a lot of money at peak times, such as April 2024, when the average transaction fee spiked close to $130. This happened because of Bitcoin's halving and the rise of something called runes, which I'll go into in a completely separate on-topic video. So most people using the Lightning Network rely on Lightning wallet providers such as Cash App that manage these Lightning nodes for you and open and close channels on your behalf. This goes against Bitcoin's ethos of decentralization, since a malicious Lightning wallet provider that has a lot of custodied Bitcoin could theoretically act improperly with its client funds across this network. We don't need a rocket science degree to see that this is a definite possibility, seeing as how FTX and Mt. Gox collapsed in 2022 and 2014 respectively, wiping out billions of dollars in client funds. Second is that the Lightning Network is not good for large payments. So this is interesting. Native Bitcoin isn't good for small payments, but Lightning Network isn't good for large payments. The reason being that in order to route transactions from one node to another that aren't directly connected, the original sender has to send the liquidity for the payment through the nodes between it and the receiver. And each of these routing nodes in between is involved in passing along the payment from the sender to the receiver. Each node in this route has to have the liquidity to pass the payment forward to the next node in the route until eventually the payment ultimately ends up with the recipient, and all routing nodes in between have unchanged balances of Bitcoin. If you send a large payment over Lightning, then there's a good chance that at some point the payment will fail because there will be no connecting node in the route that can supply sufficient liquidity to move this payment over to the next node in the route. If this liquidity has no path forward to take to keep reaching the recipient node, then the payment fails. But this isn't a problem in the grand scheme of things because obviously the Lightning Network is used primarily for small ticket payments like a cup of coffee. Third is that a node operator has to be actively ensuring that if there's a need for a dispute, that the node raises the dispute to escalate the enforcement of previous transactions to the blockchain. What this means is that if one is running their own Lightning node, then they have to be actively on the lookout for malicious updates to their channels, otherwise they can't raise disputes in the first place. This sort of also exacerbates the centralization of the Lightning Network because it forces people to rely on Lightning wallet operators since they can have 24/7 systems in place that monitor for fraud on your behalf. However, again, if they're the ones committing the fraud, then it's all kind of a moot point from there. Fourth is that Lightning is not compatible with all Bitcoin-based protocols and frameworks. For example, Exodus Wallet recently announced the removal of Lightning Network from their platform as a means of Bitcoin payments. So there has to be a consensus platform usage amongst all participants in the Lightning Network. Currently, the largest centralized exchanges such as Binance, OKX, and Kraken have risen up to become common platforms that allow Lightning transactions. Fifth is that routing nodes don't fully respect privacy in Lightning transactions, since they're made aware of certain details like transaction amounts and how far apart the sender and receiver are. This could be a problem for those seeking complete anonymity, but then again, the Bitcoin network, or Bitcoin's layer 1, is not truly fully anonymous itself. unlike a network like Monero, for example. More on that as well in a future video. Lastly, I want to make you aware of something that has nothing to do with any of these other cons. By far, the inherent pros of Lightning Network likely outweigh the cons. In the absence of a truly effective means of Bitcoin payments, the Lightning Network is becoming that effective means, albeit a fairly centralized one. It is currently the best way to use Bitcoin to pay for goods and services. And who knows, in the future it could have enough liquidity to allow Bitcoin to become something of a global currency. However, there's one final con that really isn't a con with the Lightning Network itself. This isn't about how the Lightning Network couldn't be used to allow Bitcoin to be a widely used currency. It's that Bitcoin itself, inherently and psychologically, does not suit the role of a currency. Now that might be a lot to take in if you're somebody who's a Bitcoin maximalist and or someone who believes that Bitcoin can fulfill the role of store of value and medium of exchange. But don't worry, I'll explain myself on this topic in the next video. If you enjoyed this explanation of what the Lightning Network is, hopes to be, but likely never will be, go ahead, like, subscribe, and hit that bell so you don't miss the next video when that comes out. Questions, comments, or if you think I'm wrong about Lightning, leave it down below. Thanks for watching. Peace.